Ever think about how someone could win the most votes in like a U.S. presidential election and still not be president?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of a crazy concept.
Right.
That's the Electoral College for you.
Electoral College, that's right. It's certainly a system that's generated a lot of debate and discussion, and today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a proposed solution called the National Popular Vote Bill.
Oh, cool.
We've got some listener-supplied materials to help us unpack this, a presentation that looks like it's potentially for the League of Women Voters of Virginia,
Okay.
and a report from the Congressional Research Service.
This is going to be good.
Yeah.
I like this.
It's all about how democracy works,
Yeah.
how it might work differently.
Yeah. So to get us started, can we just lay out why the Electoral College is such a big deal?
Yeah, okay. So the Electoral College is this system where states have a certain number of electors
Right.
based on their population.
Mm-hmm.
And in most states, whoever wins the most votes in that state gets all of the electors. And that's what we call a winner-take-all approach.
Yeah.
And that can lead to some kind of unexpected outcomes.
Right. Like in 2016 when Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but Donald Trump got to be president because he won the Electoral College.
That's right.
It's like, wait a minute. If someone wins the most votes, shouldn't they be the winner?
Yeah, that's a really common argument for why people are interested in electoral college reform.
Yeah.
It seems counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, totally.
So this winner-take-all system can also make candidates really focus on just a few states.
Yeah.
These are the battleground states where the outcome is still up in the air, and they might neglect other states where it seems like one party or the other is definitely going to win.
So they're not trying to get everybody across the country on board, just specific voters in certain states.
Exactly. And it makes some people feel like their vote doesn't really matter.
Right. Especially if you live in a state that's always voting for the same party.
Right. It's like your vote doesn't have much impact on who actually becomes president.
And it's not just like a feeling. Our source material had this really wild stat from the 2016 election. Over 20 million votes were essentially discarded.
Wow.
In just 6 states because they weren't battleground states.
Wow.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of voices.
Whose votes didn't really matter.
That's right. And things like that, along with some other concerns that we'll talk about, have fueled the movement for changing the Electoral College.
Okay, so how does the National Popular Vote Bill want to change things? It sounds like it's trying to make every vote count.
It is, yeah. The main idea is to guarantee that whoever gets the most votes nationwide becomes president.
Okay.
No matter what happens state by state.
So like a national popular vote.
Yeah, exactly, like a national popular vote.
So it gets rid of the Electoral College completely.
Well, not completely. It's a little more complicated than that.
Okay.
The bill wouldn't get rid of the Electoral College, but it would change how it works.
Okay.
So the states that sign onto the bill would agree to give their electors to whoever wins the national popular vote, even if someone else won in their state.
Interesting. So it's like working within the system but changing the rules.
Exactly, but there's a really important detail here.
Oh, yeah.
The bill only goes into effect when enough states sign on representing at least 270 electoral votes.
Right, because that's how many you need to be president.
That's right. That threshold is really important to make sure it actually works.
So it's like once enough states are on board, the whole system switches over.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
Okay, so how close are we to that happening?
Well, the source material says that 15 states and D.C. have already signed on.
Wow.
That's 196 electoral votes.
Okay.
So they're getting closer to that 270 mark, and Virginia is actually thinking about joining.
Oh, so Virginia could be like a key player in this.
Yeah, they could be.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Hmm.
Okay, so it sounds like this bill has some serious momentum, but I bet there are people who aren't so happy about this idea, right? What are some of the arguments against it?
Yeah, there are definitely concerns. One of the main ones is that it undermines federalism.
What is federalism?
Oh, right. Good point. Federalism is about how power is divided between the national government and the state governments.
Okay.
And critics of this bill say it takes away some power from the states and gives it to the national government.
So it's not just about counting votes, it's about who has the power.
Right, exactly. It's another layer to this whole debate.
Okay, so what else are people worried about?
Well, some states, especially those with Republican-controlled legislatures,
Huh.
are worried that this bill will mostly pass in states that tend to vote Democratic, and they're worried that'll give one party an advantage.
So it's like a partisan imbalance.
Right, that's the concern. But to be fair, the report we've got says that the national popular vote has actually passed in at least one part of the legislature in 9 other states.
Okay.
So it might have more support than some people think.
But the source material also says that so far it's only passed in states that voted for Clinton and Biden.
That's true.
So maybe that concern about partisan stuff isn't totally wrong.
Yeah, it's a valid point, but the source also talks about a survey, okay, that found a majority of voters, including Republicans, actually like the idea of the candidate with the most votes winning.
Hmm. Interesting.
So it might not be just about red states and blue states.
Right. Okay, what about rural areas, though? I mean, if every vote is the same, won't candidates just focus on big cities where there are more people?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the source addresses that head on.
Okay.
They use Ohio as an example.
Okay.
When it was a battleground state, candidates campaigned all over the place in cities and rural areas.
Right.
So they say that even with the national popular vote, candidates would still need to try to get votes from everywhere.
Okay, so maybe rural communities wouldn't be ignored after all.
Hopefully not.
But what if a state changes its mind? What if they
Um,
sign on and then they don't like how an election turns out? Can they just back out?
That's another thing the source talks about.
Okay, good.
States can opt out, but not in the 6 months before or after a presidential election.
Okay, so no funny business right before an election.
Exactly, and that's because of a federal law that says states have to have consistent rules for picking electors. Plus, the author of this presentation seems to think, based on what happened in 2020, that states wouldn't try to cheat the system.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Yeah.
But still, it's a big change.
Yeah.
It makes you think about what could happen to our political system.
Absolutely. And that's what's so cool about this.
Yeah.
It's not just about this one bill. It's about how our democracy works and how we pick our leaders.
Wow, we've learned a lot already. We've seen how the Electoral College, even though it was designed with good intentions, can sometimes lead to the person with the most votes not becoming president.
Yeah.
And we've talked about the National Popular Vote Bill as a possible solution.
Yeah.
But it has its own pros and cons. It's like the more we learn, the more questions we have.
It really is. It's fascinating.
It is. Yeah, it really is. And, it's interesting to think about why the Electoral College was created in the first place.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just a random choice.
They wanted to balance the power of bigger states and smaller states when picking the president.
So it's about making sure those smaller states still have a say.
Exactly. The founders were worried that if it was just based on the popular vote, the big cities with all the people would have too much control and the less populated areas would be ignored.
So it's about finding a way to make everyone feel like their voice matters.
Right. That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
No system is perfect.
Right.
There are always trade-offs.
Okay, so let's get back to the National Popular Vote Bill.
Yeah.
We've talked about some concerns, but what do people actually like about it?
Well, the main thing is, like we've been saying, it would make sure the person who gets the most votes across the whole country becomes president.
Right.
Supporters see that as just being fair.
It's about the people's choice actually winning.
Exactly. And they say it would make every state important.
Yeah.
Candidates would have to campaign everywhere and connect with more voters.
That makes sense. If your vote really counts, no matter where you live, then candidates can't just ignore certain parts of the country.
Right. And the source material actually mentions that voter turnout is higher in those battleground states.
Really?
Yeah. So maybe if every state was a battleground, more people would vote overall.
I guess when you feel like your vote matters, you're more likely to actually go out and do it.
Exactly. It makes it more exciting.
Yeah.
And less predictable.
Right. So this bill is about more than just changing the rules. It's about changing how people think about voting.
Right. It's about making everyone feel like they're part of the process.
It's about shifting the focus to all voters, not just those in certain states.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've looked at both sides now, and it's obviously a really complex issue.
It is.
There are good points on both sides, and we have to think about what's best for our democracy in the long run.
Yeah, that's exactly what we need to do. It's about having these conversations, listening to different viewpoints,
Yeah.
and deciding what kind of system we want for our country.
And that's something everyone should care about no matter what your political beliefs are.
Absolutely.
But, this source is just about the National Popular Vote Bill.
Right.
But this whole thing about the Electoral College is part of a much bigger conversation, isn't it?
It is. This deep dive is about more than just one solution.
Right.
It's about how democracy works and how we choose our leaders. It's about making sure the system reflects what people want, but also remembering that we have a complex system with different states and different interests.
It's fascinating to think about how different ways of voting could change the way politics works in this country.
Yeah, and there are other ways to do it, Other countries have different systems.
Oh, right. Like what?
Well, some countries use something called proportional representation, where the seats in the government are divided up based on how many votes each party gets.
So instead of just having two big parties, you could have more voices and viewpoints represented.
Exactly.
Makes you wonder if there are other ways to do things here, too.
Yeah, looking at how other countries do things can help us think about our own system and how to make it better.
It's like a giant puzzle with so many pieces.
It is, and there's no easy answer.
Right.
But talking about it,
Yeah.
exploring different ideas, that's how we get closer to a system that's fair and represents everyone.
Okay, well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll wrap things up with some key takeaways and leave you with something to think about. Okay, so we've really dug into this whole Electoral College thing,
We have.
looked at the National Popular Vote Bill, and even talked about how other countries vote.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
I feel like we've ended up with more questions than answers.
That's often how it goes with these complicated topics.
Right, but that's what I love about these deep dives.
Oh, you too.
It makes you really think.
Yeah, it challenges your assumptions about how things work.
Okay, so let's try to sum up some of the main points from our look at the National Popular Vote Bill. What were some of your big takeaways?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that even though the Electoral College was supposed to balance the power of the states, it can actually end up with someone becoming president even if they didn't get the most votes.
Right. And to me, that just doesn't seem very democratic.
I can see why people would feel that way, and that's why this whole reform movement is happening.
Yeah.
The National Popular Vote Bill is trying to fix that by making sure whoever gets the most votes nationwide actually wins.
Right, and it's doing it without getting rid of the Electoral College altogether.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting approach.
It is. So like we talked about, there are some really strong opinions on both sides of this.
Definitely.
People who support the bill say it would make every vote count the same
Right.
and get more people to vote, and ultimately lead to a result that's more representative of what people actually want.
Exactly.
But then the people against it are worried about states losing power and about one party getting an unfair advantage.
Right.
And they worry about what it would mean for rural communities. So many things to think about. It really is complex.
It is, and I think this source material did a great job of laying out both sides.
It did.
So we can really see the potential benefits and drawbacks. This whole conversation about changing how we vote is so important for our democracy.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
We all need to be part of this.
Yeah, be informed and engaged.
Absolutely.
Okay, so to wrap things up, we want to leave you with something to think about.
Imagine you're creating a brand new voting system from scratch.
Okay.
What would be the most important things to you? How would you make sure it's fair and represents everyone, but also protects the power of the states?
Wow, that's a tough one. It really makes you realize that creating a voting system that works for everyone is no easy task.
It really isn't. But these are the kind of questions we need to be asking ourselves.
We started this deep dive talking about how someone could get the most votes but not be president.
Right.
We explored the Electoral College and this National Popular Vote Bill idea.
Yeah.
And we even got into how voting works in other countries. And hopefully along the way, we've gotten you thinking about how we choose our leaders.
About fairness and representation and what democracy really means.
It's been a great conversation.
It has. Thanks for joining us.